I'm Tim Ventura from AmericanAntiGravity.com, and I'm here this evening with Mike Wright. Mike is an instructor at the Ramtha School of Enlightenment in Yelm, Washington, and an avid researcher into all sorts of different, well, I guess paranormal, but also alternative science technologies and principles. Mike, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you. I would amend your introduction to say my research focus is anomalies that are unaccounted for in conventional models of science.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm really excited to be able to get your voice on tape. If nothing else, we met a few weeks ago when Nick Cook did a presentation down at RSE in Olympia. And just for those who aren't familiar with it, the Ramtha School is a spirituality center in Olympia, and it covers just a variety of different, I guess you could call it parapsychology disciplines, but a lot of meditation and other activities as well, right?
I would say it's an academy of personal development that we use ancient wisdom as provided by the teacher, as well as modern science and the implications of modern research, and extending those to their logical consequences, and then also apply that in the laboratory of the school to practical exercises, disciplines that allows the student to take the philosophy that they've heard, apply it in an exercise, and see if it affects their life, if it improves their life, if it changes and alters their reality in ways that they find useful, that they can then either adopt the model or update their own model of reality to account for the new knowledge and the experience of that knowledge.
It's interesting that you'd mentioned models of reality. That's something that when I was in college, Danielle was working on her psychology degree, and I used to tease her about it. The joke is that it's not an exact science, but the strange thing is that the more I get into the hard sciences, like anti-gravity, definitely, but also quantum mechanics for a large part, the deeper you get in, the more it kind of comes full circle back to us as people. And you're an excellent person to talk to about this because you've worked on both sides of it. You have just this genius knowledge of quantum physics. It's just really impressive, as well as the kind of experience with parapsychology that most people just don't have. So thank
Yes.
you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Well, I should start out by asking just what your thoughts and opinions are about anti-gravity and the nature of not just gravity and the research into how to overcome it, but kind of some of the challenges that you might see there.
Well, I think the biggest challenges are twofold, and that is what we see depends upon the model that we use to interpret our observation, and that's not an original thought. That was Einstein talking to Heisenberg years and years ago. And so when we don't know that we're working with a model of reality, because we've simply taken it on and thinking that what we're really perceiving is reality directly, then we're limited in our ability to revise our model and to deal with anomalies that the model can't handle. So that's the first area, and is coming to realize that one actually works with a model and not directly with reality, that there's interpretation involved, and that interpretation is always personal, even though the knowledge under which that interpretation has been accrued may have come from other people rather than direct experience. And then the second area that I find is a challenge is that we're all speaking apparently the same language in using terms that we actually don't understand the meaning of. And so when we talk, we think we know what we're saying, but we're not. And so we have communication malfunctions. So defining one's terms, at least for the span of a conversation or a relationship, can smooth that area out. For example, anti-gravity. Anti-gravity, simply as a term, has a lot of emotional baggage attached to it, depending on where you're at in the industry or not, and what your experience is and what your education is. But in fact, we apply certain interpretations of anti-gravity all the time. Aviation, from light air balloons to jet engines and aircraft with airfoil for wings, are a form of anti-gravity. But of course, most people don't think that counts because they're looking for something else.
Yeah, definitely. I've actually encountered the models of science issue in many conversations. One of the biggest is relativity theorists arguing with quantum mechanics theorists, and usually on the doctorate level, there's an understanding. But kind of in the news groups, one of the things that we encounter is just this mutual incompatibility that's not really there because they're different explanations.
Yeah. So if you don't agree on your definitions and you don't agree on your model, then you're not going to agree any further in the conversation. So you kind of got to start there and make sure you're both reading off the same menu.
Okay. Well, in terms of, anti-gravity is just one subset of the many things that you've studied. And one of the things that impressed me most was your knowledge in an applied sense of quantum mechanics. I'm just starting to, well, I've read about it for years and years and years, but it's always difficult to really fathom some of these concepts in a real world context. And one of the things that we discussed a couple of weeks ago was many worlds theory and time travel. And you had a lot of thoughts then that were interesting just in terms of, making it real, I guess.
Yes. What I like about the many worlds theory, and you'll find that most researchers in quantum theory use it, but they're not comfortable with it because of its staggering implications and the moral issues that could surround it, if depending on your personal model of reality. But at the same time, many large corporations and departments of defense in various first world nations and governments are investing a lot of research into technology that uses the many worlds interpretation as a model, and they're working to develop quantum computers that access their parallel reality computers, and therefore they only have to build one in this reality, and yet it's a quantum model computer, and so it accesses all of its shadow computers to solve the computations millions of times faster than an ordinary computer can. And the results come back in this timeline, in this reality. So it's not as if we're talking about some theoretical model that sort of describes things that kind of happen in the quantum world. We're talking about real-world dollars and real-world technology that simply, by the way they interpret the level of reality that is the quantum world, they can get these effects.
Absolutely. Well, and the interesting thing, I just read this, was for years they were at 5 bits. I think 2.5 years was the largest. Now they've gone to 7 bits, and they're looking at an even larger one. They're actually calculating on chains of molecules. And, I have the same internal conflicts that other people do, I guess. The theory makes sense, but the implications are so staggering. And quantum computers really bring that to the head, because these things kind of sort of aren't supposed to work, and yet they do.
Well, aren't supposed to work according to what model? Because they are supposed to work according to the many worlds model.
Yeah, it's true. It's I guess a psychological limitation for me. Well, do you think we'll see something similar to this with anti-gravity?
I think so, because as soon as you have somebody that can take a radically new interpretation of the phenomenon and create a model that's outside of convention, and then get useful results from that model, you'll see rapid progress. And it's probably not going to come from within conventional extensions of conventional models, because most dramatic changes in technologies have not come from within convention.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I've wondered about is, and it's more of a gut feeling, I guess. I can't really pin it down, but it seems like in some ways, the worse people want something, the more difficult it is to obtain. And with anti-gravity, certainly both in the private sector, the government sector, and independent researchers, it's become such a holy grail, I guess, for so many years, with so many people who have taken a stab at it and failed, that it almost seems like the harder we pursue it, the further away it gets.
I actually disagree with that. And the reason I disagree with that is because the people that pursue it, that give up, weren't committed to the idea enough to see it through, and so they caved in for whatever reason. They gave in to consequences, being accepted, returning to the conventional model for whatever survival reasons. They gave up their pursuit, they gave up their dream or their focus. And for people that don't give up and that don't care about the consequences because they have the passion for this particular project, then they're the ones that are going to have that breakthrough.
Interesting. It's an interesting perspective. So, in one sense, maybe.
But it's a perspective that goes right back to quantum physics, which says the observer affects what's being observed. And to the degree that you have the intent and the focus and the passion as the observer, you begin to manipulate reality around you to mold to your intent.
That kind of ties back into some of the stuff that you've worked with at the school, also.
Yes.
Because the internal vision of reality. Well, like the quantum computer, where some of these things that we can accept that they happen, but when you see them in real life, it changes things. And at the school, through meditation and spirituality, and just a lot of Far Eastern disciplines, as well
Can
as.
I stop you there?
Oh, sure, sure.
Because the words that you're using are based on a different model. We don't do meditation, and from our context, what we do is we do focused creation, much like I described somebody who's trying to work on the anti-gravity puzzle. And the disciplines that we do may seem similar to other schools of thought, other models, but they have a distinct difference in their intent and in their origin.
Oh, okay.
And as far as spirituality, that has a lot of emotional baggage attached to it too. So let's define spirituality as in its converse. What isn't spiritual? If everything came from the void in its origins, rather than starting from some big ball of iron that went kablooey, then there isn't anything that isn't based in thought to begin with. So everything, including the anti-gravity solution that people are striving for, it all begins with a thought, and bringing that thought through focused intent into a reality. So can we call that spirituality? Then I would agree with you. Yes, it is.
I should apologize for using improper terms.
No, don't have to apologize. That's my job, is make sure we're using definitions of terms. Your terms are proper in certain contexts and models, but we'll work with mine today.
Well, to cut to the chase, though, they're getting the students there are getting results, right?
That's correct.
Real,
they're
tangible.
Applying the model, and they're getting consistent results, so they find the model is useful.
Well, what are some of the things? I mean, if you're at liberty to talk about it, what are some of the things that they're seeing with these techniques?
Well, they are able to send and receive information non-locally with a partner whom they've developed a focus or a relationship or an intent to do so with, and that's backed up in the literature, in quantum theory, in the EPR experiment, in Alan Aspect's demonstration at the quantum level, and in the brain research of Grinberg, Silverbaum, and Hal Puthoff. So we have science that corroborates that human beings have this capability, but the science doesn't go so far to say, well, you have to use it, or you can use it, or you have to be proficient at it. That's left up to the individual. We apply that knowledge here, that people then begin to develop that ability. Taking that a step further, remote viewing, which you may have heard of, which is being able to perceive information or scenes at a distance, remote from the body. And certainly somebody that could develop that skill to a high degree would have a much broader perspective of their influence and perception than somebody who doesn't. So what we do at the school, as those two examples demonstrate, are using the knowledge that the human brain, the human body, the human being have these capabilities. Do you want to develop them to the point that you don't need a cell phone, that you don't need a television, that you don't need a video webcam, because you can send and receive, you can remotely perceive and remotely influence without the aid of technology.
Interesting. It's it's just so amazing to hear about. And in addition to that, when I was down there, I met a lot of just incredibly interesting people and learned a lot about kind of the some of the techniques. And I barely scratched the surface. I was only there for a few hours, but definitely an interesting opportunity. Well, in terms of other sciences, what are the things that you're following right now in terms of more conventional science?
Things that I'm following right now, I'm following developments in quantum computing. I'm following solar research and its relationship to the solar dynamo, the solar magnetosphere, and its interactions with the Earth's magnetosphere and the Earth's dynamo because of the recent changes in the fluctuations of the Earth's magnetic field, and those impacts as that continues to possibly drop off towards a reversal, which was in the New York Times just recently, so it's actually making mainstream media. What else am I following? Research in non-locality and the observer effect. It's always a fascinating area for me because that's where I apply a lot of the work here at school to applying the mind to develop this kind of ability without waiting for the technology to arrive. Quantum teleportation is an area that I'm following because they've gone from saying it'll never be possible to send information non-locally, even though subatomic particles have non-local connections, to sending information non-locally faster than the speed of light, a few molecules, to teleporting a few molecules, to developing the ability for quantum teleportation. And the logical extension of that in mastering that arena would be to teleport people instead of simply, faxes and other smaller material objects that we're already conversant with.
Absolutely. The teleportation is definitely interesting to see how that's progressing, almost at the same speed quantum computing is. In terms of the magnetic field changing, I just received an article by Bill Alec from his news group, the Intalic.com website, and he had mentioned that not only is the magnetic field shifting, but apparently the Earth's gravity is shifting very slightly as, well, they believe, I guess, as ocean masses shift.
Sure. Well, there's probably a relationship between gravity and electromagnetism that hasn't been fully explored by conventional researchers because they base most of their electromagnetic research on Oliver Heaviside's four simplified vector notation equations of what are now referred to as Maxwell's equations, when Maxwell's original research was done in a different notation and had 20 equations with 20 variables each. So imagine what kind of electromagnetic science and understanding we would have if people went back to the original equations.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how science, I guess, as a whole, unfortunately tends to limit itself by things like equations. A good example would be the recent shift. Having worked in anti-gravity and related alternative science fields, it's interesting to see how much more accepting the scientific community has become now that string theory, quote unquote, allows some of these things to occur. So.
Yeah, and there's a lot more debate in fields about, was Einstein's equations and was Einstein's model really an accurate model? And there's a lot of people out there that are now saying no, even though there's a lot of people out there saying, how can you possibly question Einstein's research? It was so proved beyond the shadow of a doubt, only a fool or a crackpot would question Einstein's research. Well, the fools and the crackpots are the ones usually that make the breakthroughs. And, everybody that, made an anomalous discovery in their generation was a fool or a crackpot. And then, years go by and then they're the eminent founder of a new field of study. So I've been following developments in, Lorentz relativity as opposed to special relativity, and how that impacts, the study of understanding of gravity and gravitation, because there's quite a bit of confusion in even unconventional researchers between the force of gravity and gravity waves. And most people muddle the two, and you end up with pronouncements that gravity is limited to the speed of light, when in fact gravity is not as a force, even though gravity waves as a epiphenomenon is. So I'm following that thread of conversation with interest, because that may lead to some novel understandings of gravity. And I particularly like Ning Li and Baker's work and dubbing AC and DC gravity, which I'm calling the difference between gravity as a force and gravity as a wave phenomenon.
Definitely. I'm actually finishing up a page on Baker's work this evening. That's one of my other projects. So hopefully I'll have that up. And it is amazing to see some of the predictions they're making. I think Ning Li, I'd received an email from her saying that she'd actually achieved 11 kilowatts of effect. I can't validate that, but I did receive it. And Baker is quoting things like, 10 megawatts pulse, all sorts of just really high values, more than you would expect to see for not even first-generation devices.
Yeah, and what's beautiful about those early devices is they're not production models. They're cobbled together with minimal funding, and so there's a lot of looseness in the system. And the looseness in the system is what's allowing, I think, the anomalous effects like, the garage and basement inventors always seem to get. And then when the big funding comes through and all the new parts are milled to 10,000ths of a millimeter by micrometers and lasers, they can't replicate the anomalous events that were happening with the loose equipment. So it's like we photograph here, we photograph what you can find on the internet is called orbs, or anomalous luminescent bodies, global spherical bodies that appear to be intelligent to some eyes. And you don't get them with high-end cameras. You get them with cheap cameras that don't have all the bells and whistles and don't have the infrared filters and the ultraviolet lenses. And so there's a little slop in the system that allows bleed-through of phenomenon that's usually not visible to the eye, but present in the environment.
I guess it would make sense, especially the newer cameras where they filter things out.
Yeah. because they're attempting to more accurately reproduce the visual field.
Yeah, but it's based on an assumed visual field that.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, interesting stuff. Because I did infrared filming on the lifters for the first time, and there's a component to what's visible that the naked eye can see that the camera can't, and I'd always picked that up as a Chronoglow and enhanced it for the website. And I found that when I switched to infrared, the corona was invisible again. It was filtering out the entire glow. So, yeah, it was kind of a depressing turn of events.
Well, try the ultraviolet part of the spectrum.
I should. I have to buy a filter for that, I think. So,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely interesting stuff. Well, in terms of different technologies, I mean, you're familiar with well, definitely the Searle effect and a lot of other technologies.
Yes.
How do you feel about a lot of those? Do you have any kind of favorite picks in terms of what you think might bear further investigation?
Oh, I'm going to pass on that question. I am not as current on those different areas to really give a qualified opinion, but I'll be watching.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that had intrigued me, I'd written the Searle effect off years ago and ended up coming back to it with real internal questions about whether or not I could accept any of it. Searle's always had difficulties in terms of credibility, but at the same time, these anomalous reports from other areas really seem to kind of all gravitate, pardon the pun, but gravitate around Searle's description.
Their fingers are pointing towards something that nobody can speak.
Yeah, exactly. And so with Searle, it was like, well, I don't want to believe it works, and yet, why is the evidence pointing back to this? Because
I think that when we're talking about frontier science and we're dealing with anomalous phenomenon, I think that is probably the biggest clue to directions for further investigation. Is which way are things pointing? It is never going to be if it was all known, it wouldn't be frontier. So all you can do is follow the signs and follow the clues and see which way they're pointing to continue on that trail.
Well, it could be also a tell. I have a few connections, a couple in Boeing in the Phantom Works, and then a few other organizations, and an ever-increasing number of government contacts, and they all seem to be kind of keeping an eye on Searle also. That's always kind of surprised me. In fact, I just met somebody in a pretty secure government post the other day. He won't tell me the majority of what he studied, but Searle was one of the things that he'd had on his interest list.
I'm particularly interested to see what Puthoff comes up with, and also John Wheeler, because those are two individuals that have been at it for a long time as far as holding a long focus on a particular intent. And I'm really, and both of those individuals are people who, as they have become distinguished scientists, haven't made pronouncements of, oh, that's not possible, but they've continued to be open-minded about possibility. And so I'm excited by, whatever lines of inquiry they're pursuing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and in terms of something a little bit closer to what RISC focuses on, I've really been wondering a lot about Jack Sarfati.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he had in the 1960s, he's absolutely convinced, and I guess there's no way to validate it, that his research would lead to the invention of time travel. And so the last 35, 40 years of his research have been time travel.
Yeah, I think time travel actually is probably just around the corner, because it's going to simply be a matter of technology catching up to the ability to deal with microsingularities, which have yet to be demonstrated in the lab, but the modeling and the theory and the evidence for microsingularities is there. And if they can capture or create microsingularities, miniature black holes, and suspend them in magnetic shielded environments, and then feed them and manipulate them and warp their outer radius, we can get local anomalous gravitational effects. And if you get that, then you can affect the time field as well, because you come back to electromagnetic relationships and gravity and time. They're all interwoven.
Yeah, I'd heard, I think this was Discover Magazine or Scientific American 2 months ago, was talking about, I believe it was CERN being able to produce one somewhere around 2007. And if I remember it correctly, because it was a quick read, but the article had covered electron black holes as opposed to mass-based. And apparently the electron black holes are much easier to make and a lot easier to control. And they're deemed to be safer, so they feel a little bit more comfortable making them.
Yes. Well, once they get the technology caught up to the theory's already there, and not only with Sarfati's model but Puthoff's model, they all talk about the need for what they call exotic matter. Well, a microsingularity is definitely exotic matter. Room temperature superconducting is exotic matter. So once they can manufacture some form of exotic matter, they have the containment for it, then the theories are all laid out. The mathematics demonstrates how you can do that, and not only will you have teleportation in space, which could just as easily affect anti-gravity as well as bilocation, but you'll have teleportation in time as well, and you're going to have drifting effects, and the many worlds theory comes back in, and having to find some form of anchor, your reference line, and then at first it'll be small jumps, a couple of years, a couple of decades, because the further you jump, the further the errors build up, and the further you drift. And it's really no different than the development of historical development of aviation transportation or any other form of transportation. We're just waiting for that novel perspective that comes about and says, oh, hey, look what I just did, and take that to somebody else and say, do you see what I see? It's like, yeah, what can we do with this? Well, if we can do this again, then I think we've got exotic matter here, because it's weighing less than it started out.
Sure. Yeah.
Which means we're now, synchronized in two planes and have lost a degree of freedom. And if we can progress this, then we can start to warp the local general relativity field. And you can have local distortions of space-time. You don't have to use it with, galactic size or stellar size of general relativity.
Well, in terms of time travel, I guess, and it's a little bit off my coverage, but it's definitely something that's been interesting to both me as well as, a large number of the visitors on the website. One of the things that I've wondered, just as kind of an off-the-cuff thought, has been, I guess the end of the world predictions have been out there for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, certainly.
Yeah, at least, the end of the world comes every 80 years when people die. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's but one of the interesting things has been that the Mayan calendar, I guess, is somewhere around 2011, 2012, and
2012.
I've seen a few other predictions that are hovering, there. Although, as I recall, in the year 2000, I took Y2K off because I work in IT, and it came in the next day, and absolutely nothing had happened. But
yeah, they solved it all.
Yeah,
just in time.
The interesting thing about the 2011-12 is I'm almost wondering, just as an off-the-cuff thought, if time travel is invented, that wouldn't be an inappropriate time frame for that. Maybe that's
right.
What it means. Maybe that's the end of time, is literally the ability to go anywhere you want at once.
The end of time as we're used to thinking about it.
Yeah.
There's a radical enough shift, and then it's like, who was it? Who's the guy? Jules Verne. And there was a special on the Discovery or the History Channel about Jules Verne, and here are these commentators saying, we sort of think that he actually traveled to the future and saw all this stuff, and then wrote about it because he had such a passion for the future. And he's designing submarines, and he's designing all these other things based on. And did he travel there physically? Probably not, but he did it with his mind, and he accessed the ability to do things non-locally. That certainly we could continue along that thread and say that, if we redefine our concept of time travel and broaden our model, then that might lead us to new avenues of exploiting technology.
Sure. Well, and it's an excellent example of the mind visualizing things to come also. I mean, he had a really, if I remember right, the Nautilus was powered by something that was remarkably similar to a nuclear steam turbine.
Yeah.
Hot rocks that produce steam. It's an uncanny resemblance. And so hopefully with things like the Searle effect or David Hamill or a lot of the other ideas that have come out there, maybe these people are tapping into, especially in Searle's case, he had two dreams, but a lot of other individuals have had similar experiences where it comes out of nowhere and they can't explain it, and yet at the same time they know that it means something, and so maybe these are glimpses. It's maybe a non-locality of.
It absolutely is. I mean, I particularly like the story of Max Planck, and he was wrestling with this black body radiation problem and developing his idea of a smallest unit of discrete energy as opposed to an energy continuum in the spectrum. And he got frustrated, went for a walk in the park, and on his way home, he stepped on the bus, and as he steps on the bus, after having had a lovely day in the park, he hears a voice, and the voice speaks to him in Latin and says, "Quantum sufficit Maximus." And he wasn't sure if the Maximus was his name, or anyway, the way he interprets it is that nature does only that smallest amount that is necessary to accomplish whatever it is. Nature is efficient. And out of that, he felt that that voice, that inspiration, that insight led him to use the term quanta and quantum as the smallest measurement, the smallest discrete unit of energy, and went on to develop his constant, and from that constant, quantum theory, which
Sure.
set the stage for all of our modern technology.
Well, I guess another one from Chemistry 101 was the discovery of benzene. I can't remember who the chemist was offhand, but he had a dream that it was a snake chasing its tail, and that was how
Oh yeah, the benzene ring.
yeah, how he discovered the structure. So these things definitely come out of the mind. It's interesting to see how the farther out and away from ourselves we go, the more internalized it becomes in some ways.
Yep, the way in is the way out, and the way out is the way in, to quote some fortune cookie that I read some time ago.
Yeah.
Fortune cookie wisdom.
Well, on that note, we're almost out of time for this evening. But is there anything that you'd like to say to the audience before we turn in, or?
Well, I would say my two favorite quotes by Einstein that inspire me to keep going. The first is, "Space and time are not conditions in which we live. They're modes in which we think." And if you pause on that one and you say, "Well, I thought I lived in space and time," and then the ghost of Einstein comes back and says, "Exactly." So how would you think outside of space and time, and begin to explore that, the implications of that sentence from his later years when he was working on his unified field theory? And the other quote was the one that I mentioned earlier that he had in discussion with Heisenberg, and that is, "What we see depends upon the theories that we use to interpret our observations." So the more we can examine our theories, our models, our expectations, our beliefs, our assumptions, and root out those things that we're not aware of that are filtering our perceptions, the more likely we are to have a novel perspective that will lead to novel perception, that will lead to novel experiences.
Definitely. Well, do you have a URL that people could use, or an email or some type of contact if they wanted to learn?
Sure. www.ramtha.com is our school's website, and people can learn more about the school from there. If they want to email me, it's Mike W. That's MikeW at ramtha.com, and I'd be happy to correspond.
Okay, so it's www.ramtha.com, ramtha.com,
Correct?
or mikew@ramtha.com for email.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for your time, Mike. I sincerely appreciate it, and have a great evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.